You're starting. Keep an eye out in the attendees side to see if Eddie joins. Oh, okay. Oh, that there he is. Promote to panelists. Let me add the server now.
Hello.
Hey,
Hey,
Hello,
oh,
hello.
oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that. How are you?
Doing good, doing good. How about you?
All right. Can I ask a few quick questions?
Yeah.
So I let Frankie manage a lot of this, but he has been out a lot lately. And so I just want to make sure that I am giving you what you all are looking for. What is the quick rundown on the format? Am I just talking? Is there question answer panel?
Yeah. So we're just we have a few questions kind of about USDS, about civic tech, and we're just gonna ask a few questions. And
Perfect.
then,
That's awesome.
yeah, very informal.
Yeah, so
Cool.
just be a quick intro about ACM, then an intro about you. Then we have like a few questions prepared, but we can steer it however it goes. And yeah, and then we can get some like kind of audience questions at the end.
Perfect. Awesome. Thanks.
Cool, but I think we'll give it like 1 or 2 more minutes.
So let's just give it 5 minutes. I think I added them a little bit late. So 50-50
Mhm.
questions.
Yeah, cool.
I'm gonna also start a stream of this too. For that. Broke it. I'll make the screen. Anyway, class of 2024, right?
Yeah, class of 2024. Right. Hello everyone. We'll be starting in roughly like 1, 2 more minutes.
Another quick question. Is this being videotaped? How honest can I be?
Right now we're recording to YouTube, but we can, if it's better, we can, I guess, not record it to
No,
YouTube.
it's fine. I just want to make sure that I'm, don't go too far off the topic.
Gotcha.
These are weird times. So
Mm.
just thanks for the help. Just making sure I know what I'm getting myself into.
Gotcha.
All right, let's start in 1 minute. All right, Arnak, I think we're ready to start now.
Yeah, let's go for it.
All right, cool. So I'll be the main host for the event, but I'll quickly give a rundown of ACM Innovate if everyone hasn't heard of it yet. So just to quickly explain, ACM is the world's largest computing society, and the ACM chapter at UCSD is the largest engineering student organization on campus. ACM Innovate's mission is to inspire innovation and entrepreneurship at every level and to bring together like-minded individuals. For today's talk, we are delighted to be joined with Eddie Hartwig. Eddie is the Deputy Administrator for the USDS, but I think prior to that, Eddie also served as an advisor and speechwriter to the US, as an ambassador to Austria too. And while at Austria, he also founded and directed Elevate Entrepreneurship, a grassroots movement to improve and grow Austria's innovation economy. Without going too much further in depth, I guess like the first question a lot of people have on their minds is, what is the U.S. Digital Service and what do you do there?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Hi everyone, it's nice to be here. So USDS, with the United States Digital Service, is it's a little bit hard to describe. It's best described as a startup inside the White House. We were founded by this guy you might have heard of named Barack Obama. He had a little problem rolling out a website called healthcare.gov, which was really the functional implementation of the Affordable Care Act. And so one of the biggest policy changes in the history of the country, or at least in recent memory. And all the ducks were sort of lined up in different rows, and everybody was getting all of the work done on the policy side, the legislative side. But when it came down to actually put the service into place, despite all those years of work, what failed was the website. And in many cases, very specifically, the login piece of the website. And so it was a stunning example of how all the best laid plans can be taken down by a simple inability to understand how to launch what most of us would consider a pretty simple thing. Interestingly enough, there's a really complicated data hub behind healthcare.gov that reaches out to dozens of different agencies to verify your social security number, whether you have a warrant out for your arrest, whether you owe taxes, all sorts of stuff. That complicated piece of infrastructure actually works pretty well. It was actually just the front end website that failed. And so when healthcare.gov launched, they were expecting 1 million people to sign up for healthcare on the first day. And ultimately they ended the day with 6 signups. So below expectation. So that wasn't USDS. What ended up happening was the president, like, now that there was a big technical tire fire going on, the president said, like, all hands on deck, whoever can help, get them to help. Brought some people from the private sector in who basically did incident response, stepping up to the plate, using like the bare minimum to get the website up and functional. And then after that, like the open season did actually happen. It was delayed, or was extended, I should say. About 8 million people did manage to sign up for healthcare by the end. And when the open season closed, a lot of work went into trying to actually fix healthcare.gov, the website, and make it more stable and more scalable for the future. And in fact, that work has gone on for 8 years now. We're on the 8th open season of the ACA. More than 20 million people have signed up for healthcare to date, many for the first time in their lives. And so it was a moment of failure that really was revived based on technology. And so about a little bit less than a year later, the president and the team in the White House decided that maybe there was a use for these skills somewhere else in government. Maybe other government systems weren't great. And let me, I'll just skip to the end, which is government technology is not the best, you may have noticed. It sort of reflects the experiences you have in person, standing in lines, filling out paperwork, things like that. And so the president founded the United States Digital Service, bringing together the original healthcare.gov team members, along with some folks that have been working at the VA and some other folks that have been working at the Department of Homeland Security on immigration, and built this small team of people. It was 12 of us at first. I wasn't there. I joined later. But those 12 people had a mandate to sort of fix the things that were most broken in government, technically. they thought they would get to maybe 20 people by the end of the year, but they made it to 50. And within 2 years, we were 200 people working on dozens of projects throughout the federal government. Everything from reforming, rebuilding the immigration system to looking at what the future of Medicare might look like if we could build it the way that we wanted to, something that focused on the value of the care provided and not necessarily the, the billing structure that it is today. And so USDS is really, it's two things. It's technical expertise when technical expertise is needed most. And so we still do incident response for the entire federal government out of the White House. We worked on things that you would probably be pretty familiar with, the OPM breach when the US government's personnel system was hacked several years ago. We worked on the FAFSA. Some of you may have even been applying using the FAFSA the year that it failed or the year that it started spreading people's information across the internet. And so working on those types of problems, but also looking forward to try to avoid disaster by building better tools and better products that are more scalable, more resilient, and more secure. And so to date, we've built about 170 products in the course of about 6 years that have reached hundreds of millions of Americans. And interestingly enough, it's hard to meet somebody these days who hasn't been affected or someone in their family hasn't had like 1 degree of separation from the work that we've done, whether it's healthcare, whether it's veterans affairs, immigration, small businesses, the economy, education. So yeah, that's
Right,
where
I
we
guess
are.
it's really nice that you mentioned those projects. And I think the one that's most recent right now is coronavirus.gov, I believe, right? And
So
that's
it's interesting. We didn't actually work on
oh
coronavirus.gov.
wow.
We worked with the CDC on cdc.gov/coronavirus.
Mm,
Coronavirus.gov was an initiative that came out of the White House itself to try to centralize not just, I believe, not just the health aspect of coronavirus, but like the entire economic aspect. And so that was built by colleagues of ours over in the General Services Administration, a group called 18F, very similar to USDS, that does more project-based work. And a group there that they have called the Centers of Excellence, which are sort of a building capacity group. Like, so they help agencies move to the cloud. They help with cloud email. They help with, the sort of the basics that we all take for granted, but the government has not yet reached in some cases. But yeah, so that website is actually not run by us. We did talk with them about it, but we have been fully immersed with the CDC, and we were focused more on the health aspects at the time.
yeah, so I guess like bouncing off like a lot of the projects, I guess like a big question is how can the government and specifically the USDS innovate? Because I think from like an outside perspective, a lot of the I guess people view the government as like very bureaucratic and like slow and old. So is there like a sort of like countermeasure for that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know that there's a countermeasure for it. I think that what it takes is persistence. I think we have an engineering-based crowd, right? So we can dig in a little bit. And so really, honestly, the government, most of the major systems that you encounter with the federal government, at least, are 20 to 40 years old, which means that they're built on mainframes. They're not even built on servers, right? They're built on like huge mainframes. They're built oftentimes written in languages that we would consider ancient, things like COBOL or MUMPs. And so, and to their credit, like I've learned to have a healthy deal of dose of respect for COBOL and MUMPs, because while they're complicated and they're not exactly efficient, they are very stable. And that has been very important to keeping them running for years. In fact, most of NASA's satellites run on these programs, and they have outlived their shelf life for decades, which has been great. The problem with these programs is, infinite. There are infinite number of folds here, but most likely is that what we're seeing with the unemployment insurance problem in America is that Congress is coming out with new rules for unemployment insurance to help Americans. They're, introducing things like the pandemic unemployment insurance assistance and compensation assistance and LWA, which I think is lost wages assistance. Well, these are new programs to the states, but the states are using these older systems. And so they're just not nimble enough to be able to get in there and write COBOL code that can manage all of these new functions and these new calculations in a way that can keep up with the speed of the times. Like there are systems in the government that are 60 million lines of COBOL that perform as little as 300 functions. And so there's a lot of stuff like that out there. The problem about innovation, so there's a question of meeting the moment, which I think we just covered, but the question of innovation in general is actually one of moving the government out of mainframes and on-prem servers, trying to position them in a way where they can start writing code as if they were in the late 2000s, like 2008, 2009, which is to say, we move out of a waterfall mentality of project planning and requirements building. We move them out of on-prem physical equipment that they need to maintain, and we get them into an elastic, secure, resilient cloud environment. We move them to an agile sort of development methodology of some kind, and we get them in the habit of releasing code every week, right? Instead of releasing code every quarter, which is the standard for the government. Is to just line up a bunch of releases at 10 p.m. at night to turn the internet off, right? And to roll out a bunch of releases. Anything that doesn't work, you roll back and you wait 3 more months before you put it in the next release queue. And it's just really not an efficient way of developing software. It's not an efficient way of writing code. It's not an efficient way of meeting the demands of an environment or a modern society. But it's what they have and it's what they're used to. And so if we're not trying to build the software of 2030 or even 2020, if we could just help them move into an environment where they're building in the software of 2010, from there they can actually, that's where they can innovate, right? Because they're stuck in a space between where we are today, if you're learning to engineering in a university today, and where they had built these systems that were built based on the university teachings of the 1980s. And so once we get them there, we see that they do amazing things. And so at the VA, for example, when we first went to the VA, it was the same story, lots of on-prem, lots of waterfall methodology, lots of complicated bureaucratic rules, right? So if Conway's law tells us that if this computer system is going to just reflect all the human communication patterns underneath it, well, the VA has a massive like nest of communication patterns with multiple systems and multiple people that need to make multiple approvals in order to do simple things like approve healthcare. And so, so once we get into an environment where you can actually release code on a regular basis, when you can actually write in modern languages, when you can actually spin up whatever you need in AWS or in Azure on demand, then like you see the mentality changes and we can move very quickly. And so from the first time we shipped the healthcare application form to the VA 5 years ago, today VA is a modern organization. When COVID hit, they were the only high impact service provider, which means like one of the highest, most important systems in the federal government recognizes. They were the only high impact service provider to actually not only meet the moment of COVID, because they had built a web service. They transformed their entire approach from being inward looking, like the va.gov being about the VA. They changed the va.gov to be about veterans. And they had built about 20 tools that met 80% of veterans' needs based on 5,000 veteran interviews and bits of research. They have a Veterans Experience Office, which does metrics and holds the VA accountable. And so you see all these things come into place. And what that means in real terms is veterans are pretty happy with the VA services right now. And when it came to the pandemic, VA wasn't scrambling to put a paper form online. They were actually thinking about really high level problems like triaging the difference between video telehealth from audio telehealth. Turns out that for COVID, audio telehealth is really effective. And you can save video telehealth for services that really need that functionality, things like substance abuse or suicide risk. And so it's amazing what you can do in a fairly short period of time to transform an agency as large as the VA. The VA, by the way, to put it in perspective, they employ as many people and they serve as many people as the entire government of the United Kingdom. So they are a small country. Actually, they're a medium-sized country that runs education, healthcare benefits. It's pretty impressive. And so what they've done really is an example of, if you do the foundation, you lay the groundwork for the first year or two to really get those pieces in place, you can make rapid change and it will do real good in the world.
Yeah, I think it's nice that you mentioned, I think deploying a lot of things on the cloud now. I think there's a website called cloud.gov in which you can kind of check out a lot of that from the USDS. Yeah.
That's right.
I think, yeah, kind of going into, I guess, the USDS as an organization, I guess from a lot of people's perspectives, companies often optimize for profit. That's like their North Star metric for like whether they're succeeding or not and staying afloat. However, for the government, that doesn't seem to be the case. Like you can't optimize for profit. So if you're not really optimizing for that, then what's your sort of North Star metric, or like what is like your goal in mind? How do you measure that?
No, this is a great question, and it's a really fascinating question. And I'm gonna answer it, and then I'm gonna take it another direction really quick. The metrics we use are human metrics. You know, we think about how many people can access this web page. Right. The standard we have for building a service is, can you access it from a library computer, you know, with a 256K dial-up connection from a frontier county in the West, right? If you can do that, then you can meet the needs of all of your users. Right? Is the website, you know, metrics like, is the website have a screen reader? Is it accessible to everyone? Because the government doesn't serve a market segment either, right? It doesn't have a profit motive, but its audience is 100% of people. And so you really need to start thinking in terms of how many people can access your web page, how many people can complete, you know, the sort of more market, the recognizable ones are like, what is the completion rate, right? What is the click-through rate? Like, where do people drop off? But really what we're talking about is we're talking about real human outcomes. How many people signed up for healthcare today and were approved? How many veterans, you know, had a positive outcome from their appeal? How many immigrants were able to become American citizens? Like, these are all systems that we've worked on. And so we're kind of, the mentality is different. And this is where I'm going to pivot a little bit. You can do amazing things when you take away the profit motive. So USDS and 18F actually collaborated to build a system called login.gov, which was designed to be a single sign-on system or option for all government. The interesting thing about login.gov isn't that it's a single sign-on system. That's a pretty common thing you can find out there. But what's interesting is, without a profit motive, we can actually build a system that the private sector would never build. So login.gov is designed with three pieces in mind: security, privacy, and usability. But it's a balance between the three. And so when we built login.gov, one of the things that we thought about was, could we encrypt the user's identity from ourselves? And so if you imagine login.gov, in the backend is just a huge table, right? With columns and rows. Each person has a row. Each column is the data points that they collect. So one, we're very conscious of what data we do collect. We need to collect enough data to know that you are who you say you are. But once we know that, how much of that do we need to save? So we collect as little information as possible, and then we maintain as little information as possible. So like, if we ask you for your bank account number so we can verify your identity through your bank, we're only going to keep that in one session. Once that session expires, that information is going to go away, and it's going to be replaced with like a green check mark that says like that box was checked. Then we're going to encrypt each column and each row individually, right? And we're going to create an enterprise encryption key. And what are we going to do with that enterprise encryption key? We're actually going to give it to you. And so if you go to login.gov and you sign up for an account, you'll get the familiar, like, here's your recovery code. But instead of getting 50 recovery codes, you're going to get one. And you'll click to the next page, and nobody remembers their recovery code, right? And so you click to the next page, and we actually make you enter the recovery code. It's sort of annoying and pedantic. It breaks the user experience. But what it makes you realize is, like, actually, this is important. And so you have to go back and you have to copy down the recovery code and you type it in. Why did we do that? Because that's actually the encryption key. Like, we can't, if you want to access a website using login.gov, it's going to ask you for your password and your username, and it's going to perform some form of two-factor authentication, preferably tokenized, but you can do it by text message if you need to. You can even do it by audio phone call for users that don't have cell phones. And if you ever lose that two-factor authentication device, that recovery code, we can't actually see your information. So if you lose your two-factor device, you need to enter that recovery code. If you lose that recovery code, we can't open your account. And so you have to actually reapply. And then then what will happen is we'll dedupe your account based on a common number between the two that's in your personal information. And then we'll have to rectify that manually and then start you over again, which is interesting, right? Because there's no incentive in the private sector not to know that information. Like, that demographic information is valuable, but for the government, it's not valuable. It's actually something that they treasure and they protect, and they want to do everything they can not to take advantage of, because of things like the Privacy Act. And so you can build a system like that that's sort of fascinating technically, right? that is interesting to work on and that you'll never find in another environment.
Yeah, I think just asking some questions right now. I think we talked previously about working with the CDC a lot. I was just wondering how much interagency collaboration you have with other departments. Do you have some formal system requests? How do you reach out to other departments, or how does it really work between every single sector or every single vertical of the government?
Yeah, it's interesting. So one, there's more work to do than we could ever accomplish, right? So the joke is that it's not a target-rich environment. It's an environment made up 100% of targets. Everything's broken. Everything's outdated in some way in the government. It can all be improved. And so we do have to triage which cases we take. We just make decisions about cases based on impact. We actually prioritize the work that we do based on how much good it does for how many people and how much need those people are in. And so, there are some obvious contenders, things like Medicare. Medicare serves 57 million Americans. But Medicare is also the bedrock of our economy. I don't think many people know that, but Medicare itself is 3.5% of all of US GDP. Up until this year, Medicare, not the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, not HHS, just Medicare, had a budget larger than the Department of Defense. It pays $2 billion a day to doctors across America. Right? And it performs a really, really important secondary function, which is the money that doctors get from Medicare support other services, because Medicare is an incredibly reliable payer. Sometimes they're a little slow, but they pay according to their rules. And when they pay, that props up hospitals all across America, especially hospitals in rural areas. And so if Medicare were to fail, not only would Medicare patients not be able to get the care that they need, not only would small hospitals in rural areas start closing down, making it harder and harder for people to get essential care like OBGYN and mental health, but it would also push the economy into near collapse. So Medicare, not only is it 3.5% of GDP on its own, because it's the biggest health insurance company in the world, it's 6 times larger than the next largest private health insurance company in the United States. And so because of that, it actually governs what the medical space looks like. If Medicare makes a decision, the rest of the medical space usually agrees with it, because you can't compete with Medicare. And so as we try to innovate and think about what the future of medical care looks like in America, it's not actually the private sector that's doing most of the leading. It's actually Medicare itself. And in doing so, it controls the entire medical market, at least in some respects, which makes Medicare responsible, if you think of the secondary effects, for 17% of the entire economy. So 17 cents out of every dollar that's spent in America every year is spent on medical care. And a lot of that tracks itself back to Medicare. And so that's a huge program with a huge impact for millions of people's lives. One of our product managers actually set out to solve what she thought was a miscalculation in the way that Medicare was making decisions around Bluetooth technology and security, which prevented Medicare from approving durable medical devices that had used Bluetooth. So think about continuous glucose monitoring for diabetes. If you have a patch on your arm and it talks to your phone, that's a much more effective and efficient way of monitoring your glucose than pricking your finger every 4 to 6 hours. But that wasn't allowed. And so what happened is Medicare was paying for a cottage industry of outdated devices because they met their Bluetooth. And so when we got into modern Bluetooth era, the security features were much better. There was really no reason to do this, but Medicare wasn't aware of this. And so on this quest that this product manager went on to solve this problem, she actually was able to bring it to the attention of the administrator for Medicare and Medicaid, who made a policy change that overnight made it possible for 7 million people to get access to better medical information by being able to just simply use Bluetooth. And so it's huge problems that have the small problems inside of Medicare are still millions and millions of people. On the other hand, we also pick impact based on the amount of need that those people are in. And so one thing that comes to mind that always sort of catches me off guard is that there's a group of people at the VA, or actually there's a group of people in the United States who served their country overseas or in a time of war, who were then less than honorably discharged. It's about, I don't remember, about 500,000 people that fall into that category. But within that category, about 75,000 of those people were discharged for reasons that arguably weren't their fault. And by that, I mean, they served in a war zone and they suffered from PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, or they suffered from traumatic brain injury from potentially a roadside bomb, for example. And then they had a work-related incident that is related to that care that got them thrown out of the military. Maybe it was not showing up for work. Maybe it was alcoholism, but directly related to their service. Those people were discharged with less than an honorable discharge. More depressingly, the same category falls for people who identified as LGBTQ, who were thrown out of the military because of their sexuality, either before or during Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And probably the most depressing category is that there are people who were victims of sexual assault, who were forced to work, for example, for their assaulter while that process was being worked out, who then quit or were let go from the military for an unwillingness to do so. Those people all have an opportunity today to upgrade that discharge to honorable. Like, the military has realized that this is a mistake and then it should be fixed. But it's a really interesting design challenge, because it's, how do you reach these people? These are people that we're told they're not veterans, right? And so you don't use the Veterans Affairs Department. And so there's a complicated process of filing paperwork among 4 or 5 boards at each of the different military branches, and each board is divided into 2 halves, either the sort of PTSD, TBI side or the other side. And so as you're working through that, what we found through simple research is that people weren't applying, and the people that were applying weren't succeeding, and it wasn't their fault, right? Like, it was that the paperwork didn't explicitly say how to do the problem. In that case, we weren't trying to sort of pull data off a mainframe and move it into the cloud where we could do value-based care, really complicated bit of engineering like we were in Medicare. This was about building a web form, a responsive tool that just helped you understand what to file and where and when. And that tool, it reached about, I think today it has reached more than 2/3 of people who were eligible for a discharge upgrade. And to me, those 2 projects are equal in their impact, because one has a huge scale and a massive impact on a number of people. But the other was about restoring identity, right? If you served your country and then you were told you're not a veteran, like, that's damaging in a completely different way than, if you can't have access to care. And so we're never really going to fix the bond that was sort of ripped apart there. But we can at least stitch it together. We can give people back their dignity, and we can give them a chance to exercise their benefits and honor their service. And so 2 very different sides in this sort of spectrum of scale as far as the numbers, but equal, I think, in the terms of impact, because I'm not sure how many people would have picked up a project that small and helped people in that much need. Sometimes those kind of things can get forgotten about.
Mhm. And I think we have a question that's sort of related to what you just said about healthcare. Nick asked, what type of role would the USDS play if US adopts single-payer healthcare? Would the USDS be working with the HHS to implement this expanded Medicare? How would the US avoid a healthcare.gov problem if we were to expand healthcare?
It's an interesting question, and thanks for it. One, I don't know of a plan to develop single-payer healthcare yet. But to be honest, the government already serves about 33% of people in the country. It's not just Medicare. So Medicare is the largest, insurance payer in the world. So they're an insurance company, essentially. But the VA is the largest provider of healthcare in the United States. They're actually the largest hospital network. And so between those 2, as well as TRICARE, which is over at the Department of Defense, and the Indian Health Service, another part of Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, they actually serve about 1 in 3 Americans in their healthcare needs. And so they're used to the scale. In fact, actually the government, there's a lot of really great dedicated folks, both doctors, policy people, but also engineering folks that have really working hard to ensure that these systems are as durable as possible. And so while many of them still are on mainframes, recent improvements in training and in infrastructure have actually made it possible for Medicare to serve more people. And like that's been in place for a long time as teams sort of ramped up for the baby boomer generation to enter those services. And so there's been a lot of care and a lot of work put into making sure that they're resilient. And so, for example, the incoming president-elect has talked about lowering, for example, the age of eligibility for some of these programs. I'm confident that today, those programs in the systems that exist now will step up to that challenge. And so I don't know about the single payer question, but what I will say is healthcare needs to change. Right now, healthcare pays for things. So, you get an itemized bill. And sometimes the worst part about it, if you've really had health problems, is you get about 20 itemized bills from 20 different places. You go to one hospital and you get billed by doctors separately from the hospital, separately from, the nursing system. And so that's all a product of how these systems are built. Like Medicare pays for stuff. It pays for, plaster for a cast. It pays for toilet paper in the bathroom if you stay overnight. It pays for an hour of a doctor's time. But stuff isn't really the point of the healthcare system. The point of the healthcare system is to prevent people from getting sick in the first place and to help them get healthy if they do get sick. And so that's what a lot of people refer to as value-based care. Can we provide better outcomes to patients? And the answer is, sadly, that palliative care, the act of caring for someone who's dying, is actually far more expensive in the stuff category than it is to aggressively detect, treat, and cure cancer. And so what we need to do is we need to start thinking about how we build a system that pays a doctor more to succeed than to fail, and that respects a doctor's time. And so they're not filling out paperwork. Right now, doctors spend about 33% of their day filling out paperwork and not seeing patients. And so what we're working on how could we potentially shift the infrastructure underneath all of that to be able to not just deliver on the promise of value-based care, but just have the computational capacity to calculate value-based care. You think about it, right? Like, what does good look like? The computer is not going to tell you that. And so how do we build a system where we can sort of approach a logical outcome that says this is better than that? And so what we're talking about is like, if you get a knee replacement, it's better, can you walk? Like, are you more ambulatory? Do your costs go down after that? Like, do you see the physical therapist for a shorter period of time, right? And so what is the cost of the knee replacement? What is the cost of the human outcome? Or what is the benefit of the human outcome? And what reduction in costs and services that free up more doctors' time for more patients come following that? And that's a really hard thing to do with 30 million lines of COBOL. And so what we're the nitty gritty is that you got to build, basically you don't have to, but like one way of doing it is you can build like a Java API on top of your COBOL mainframe. You can extract that data into a cloud environment where you can have nearly unlimited computational power. But then eventually, because everything runs through that mainframe, you've got to insert that outcome back into the mainframe. So you've got to trick the mainframe into thinking that it's talking to itself. And you have to sort of calculate what you want to happen, what the mainframe would have to output to provide the right outcome through the system. Because you can't ever rip the mainframe out and start over, because like I said, if you shut down Medicare for a week, you deal a $10 billion blow to the economy. And so it's a process of creative solutions without ever stopping services. It's a fantastic and amazing challenge. And it's a really interesting way of looking at problems that is very unique. It's extremely fulfilling, and it's also very hard and very frustrating every day. And so I don't want to give you the wrong impression. Like, this stuff is really difficult and it's really hard. And a lot of it has to do with human interaction, but the outcome, when you work hard and you struggle for 9 months, but when the outcome is that you improve the lives of 25 million people, it's a pretty good day when you launch.
And just like blasting through the rest of the questions now, we have another question from Stanley. How does payment in government work? If USDS is working for another agency, how does an agency get paid if technically everything is just the government or same organization?
So there are different answers for this, and different groups like 18F and USDS have different approaches to this. At its core, USDS is funded directly by Congress. And so we're funded so that we can respond immediately to problems throughout the government, and so that when something needs to be done, money doesn't get in the way. So we actually, for the most part, don't cost agencies anything. If we go work on a challenge, we go work on a challenge because it needs to get done. Over time, USDS has built relationships with places like the VA, where the VA has really taken on more and more responsibility. And the reason for that is that USDS is not designed to be load bearing. Like we don't want to be the product owner. We want to be there to facilitate the change. We want to be there to help with the technical expertise. But eventually, that product is going to be owned by that agency or by that stakeholder. And so we work in a way where we will start by rolling up our sleeves and writing code, doing design research, and teaching, like bringing people on to iterative development cycles. But from there, we'll step back, right? And we'll start managing the contractors, and we'll start working with the staff to help them understand, right? Because you can't just have a great contractor. You got to have a great contractor, and you've got to have a good federal product manager who's able to manage that contractor. Because if the contractor is speaking a language that the government doesn't understand, it's not much better than where you started. And so we're walking back as we put in a contract, then we'll help with the contract management, we'll help with product management, then we'll step back, we'll play an advisory role, we'll be there in case something happens, but eventually we'll step back and walk away, and that agency will hopefully not only have a better product, but they will adopt the mindset of modern software development, right, and human-centered design. And that's when, that's the ideal state, is that you'll see something like the VA, who hired on a fantastic chief technical officer, built a digital product team in the VA, and really is now generating their own product on their own, without a ton of outside help, which is great.
Yeah, I think you talked a little bit about that iterative development, and this question kind of ties into it. Jimmy asks, how have you been able to make shifts in agile development? In more specifics, how do you continue to make changes while dealing with legal restrictions faced by higher ups / other government officials / some policies?
Yeah, this is a great question. This is the heart of it. This is what the work is. So, right, I'm not gonna lie, like Medicare, the engineering is really hard. But for most of our project, the engineering is not that tough, right? We're talking about web forms. We're talking about web forms and JSON blobs, and that solves a lot of the problem. We're not trying to we're not doing AI. we're just trying to move the government off of fax machines. So, and so how does this work? So I'm going to take you on a little journey, and tell me if I get too far off. But if you've ever been to the DMV, and you stand in the line at the DMV, and let's say you're person number 99 in line, and there are 20 counters, and there's 20 people behind the counter, but only 2 people are actually working at the counter, right? And I've been there, and I'm so frustrated. I'm like, well, if only those 18 people would go to the 18 open counters, we'd be through this 5 times as fast. But the interesting thing about what you do in the government is, like, we actually walk behind the counter and we meet all of the civil servants that are there, and they're just as frustrated. And they're saying, if only we could all go to the counter, then we would do this 5 times as fast, right? And the problem is that somebody's funding is not appropriate, or somebody doesn't have the training, or somebody doesn't have systems access, or somebody is a detailee from another organization and therefore they can't, they don't have the authority to do it. And so the point is, it seems irrational when you're on the public side and you're looking and saying, like, what are you doing? Or the private side. And on the public side, and the civil servants are actually, they're acting perfectly rational. It's just that the environment in which they operate is filled with irrational incentives. And so part of this job is actually aligning those incentives. And so you want to start by not building product, but by doing research, but by creating a plan of action that's inclusive, including the legal team, including the budget team, including the procurement team, including the product team. So the program office is usually the people that have the knowledge of the product that's being put out, but then there's an IT office, which is in a separate silo. So you really got to bring everybody together. You get one accountable stakeholder, you have a common vision, and then you start working everything from policy to product together to try and bring, move solutions forward. That makes it take longer, right? Like, honestly, like, you can build a web form in a couple of days. but it might take 3 months to get it shipped. But what you're doing during those 3 months is you're making sure that everybody is along for the ride. And also government has a special responsibility that the private sector doesn't always have, to take your security and your privacy really seriously. And so the government operates on trust. And so if the government were ever to lose that trust, it's far more damaging. Like, people file their taxes every year because they trust the government with their like intimate financial details, right? But if the government were to repeatedly lose or share that information, then people might not file their taxes, which would undermine the economic base of the country. And so we've really got to be careful. And there are a bunch of rules that are set in place that do slow things down, but they slow things down for a good reason. They might slow things down to make sure that the government treats people more equitably and more equally across all different walks of life, right? Makes sure that accessibility is there in a way that your average pizza tracker might pick the best colors for their particular brand, but those colors might not have the contrast necessary for colorblind people to be able to read their website. That's fine if you're delivering pizza. It's not fine if you're delivering fair housing. And so there are reasons for the delay that are good. There are reasons for the delay that are bureaucratic. And the solution is to pull people together, understand the why behind all of those rules and regulations and policies, and then change the ones that needed to be updated for a modern government, and keep in place those that serve a true purpose of creating a government that's open and accessible to everybody. And so it takes time. It takes more time than I would like, to be honest. But like I said, in the end, the results are worthwhile, and preserving the integrity of the government is an incredibly important piece of the work. So.
And I think with a lot of our audience, specifically kind of pursuing a major like computer science and like wanting to be software engineers one day, someone asked, what is an average day as a software engineer in government like? How different is it from working at a private company?
So I'm not a software engineer, so I can't speak to that. But I will tell you that my engineers tell me all the time that they thought they were coming to write code, and they didn't realize they were coming to talk to cabinet secretaries and work with contractors. And so here's the deal: like, the government, like I said, uses all of these older languages. They're far more risk averse than most people, and so at my team, we're hiring people that have like all the modern skills you would expect. But like, they're not going to write Go, they're barely going to use Python. And the reason for that is because we need to meet the government where they are. And like I said, if we're going to hand this off, if we're not going to be load bearing, but we're going to give the product back, we have to hand the product back in a way that can be owned and maintained by the people that work in those agencies, whose skills might be more Java based than JavaScript based. So there's a lot there to think about. Like, it's important that people on the team have the modern mindset, because I think that we need to prepare the government to be there. But it's also about checking your biases at the door and realizing that what we're striving for is not beautiful engineering. What we're striving for are those human outcomes, and the real goal is to do whatever it takes. So sometimes that means advising people, and sometimes that means writing code, and sometimes that means in the case of a couple of our engineers, learning COBOL, so you can have a conversation about what it takes to actually get started to fix big problems like the social security system and then things like that. So I think what I would say is the average day in the life of an engineer at USDS or a designer or a product manager is not glorious. It's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of mundane stuff. It's a lot of repetition, but a lot of meaningful outcomes.
Mm-hmm. And I guess regarding sort of the challenges at the USDS, someone also asked, was there ever a time you felt like this is it, like a really tough time? How do you personally push through this?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry, my daughter has a question for me. Oh. Sorry, we lost a tooth. It's a big day. Can you give me the question one more time? Sorry about that.
So this is kind of regarding the challenges of the USDS. Like, was there ever a tough time, or was there ever a time you felt like this is it, like a tough time? How do you personally push through this?
Yeah, I mean, there are tough times all the time. It's hard. There's a lot of responsibility that falls on your shoulders. It can be really mentally draining to realize that you can't fail, Like, this is not fail fast. Like, this is not move fast and break things. This is like move deliberately and be careful not to step on anybody's toes. Because if you, like I said, if you break some of these things, like, they don't unbreak easily. I actually was introduced to USDS because I was overseas. I was Deputy Consul General. I was manning a visa office in Vienna, Austria at the time that the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action or the nuclear deal for Iran, was signed, and the entire worldwide visa system broke. They did a database upgrade, it failed, and they made a mistake in integrating the backup, and the backup failed, and the system was down for 2 weeks. And the outcome of those 2 weeks was that they had just concluded the Iranian nuclear deal, and the secretary had sent the Iranian negotiators to my office to get their visas so that they could go and announce this huge achievement on the floor of the UN General Assembly, which was happening at the same time. And I had to say, I can't issue the visas. And they were mad because Iran took to the floor of the UN and accused the United Nations of playing political games with the visa system to try and prevent the shared recognition of the work that had gone into this at the UN. And that wasn't the case at all. That wasn't the case. Was literally like there was a technical failure that shut down the visa system worldwide 2 weeks. It's a $65 billion industry. There's 52 weeks in a year. You can calculate out the cost of such a failure. And so there are huge real problems that happen when these things fail. And so one, it's mentally draining to do that. Right now, we're trying to build a more resilient public health infrastructure for the country in the middle of a pandemic. You know, we're going to launch some new tools next week, and we're all a little trepidatious about what that means. Like, did we do enough, you know, to mitigate this? Are we rolling it out correctly? But the need is there. There's oftentimes urgency at the same time you want caution. And so, yeah, and there are times we fail. I don't want to pretend like USDS is perfect. Like, we sometimes get it wrong. Sometimes we're right, but the way that we try to express that we are right comes across, you know, either hard to understand because we're too technical, or it comes across as aggressive and unhelpful and unproductive. And that can really mean that you lose access to things, which means if you can't get access to the system you want to try and fix, then you really can't help the people that you want to help. And that has happened before too. And so, you know, we've had a number of failures over the years. I think a good friend of mine explained it as every day at USDS, you wake up in the morning and you put a penny in your backpack, you know, and then you go to work. And at the end of the first week, you're like, this is great. You know, at the end of the first year, you're like, oh, you know, 365 pennies are kind of heavy. At the end of year 3, 1,000 pennies start getting really heavy, and your backpack starts getting harder and harder to pick up every day. And that's okay. Like, the way that we operate is we hire people for really short periods of time. So you can join USDS from as little as 6 months to as long as 4 years. But at the 4-year mark, that's it. Like, we ask you to move on, because what we need is we need people to recognize that the work is hard, that their time is limited, that they should take advantage of the opportunity that they have in front of them to work on these challenges, but also to give themselves a break, because it does wear on you.
Mm-hmm. And we have another question from Nick. How do you ensure that the department remains nonpartisan? How do you not get defunded by the government / avoid being labeled as partisan?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And look, I just want to say these are all great questions. They're super insightful. So the answer is a little bit of blunt answer, which is that I do think that it takes political change to create something like USDS. And we were an experiment, and we were a gamble, right? Like, there was no guarantee that, you know, bringing a bunch of tech people in was really going to do any good for government. And so it really took something like healthcare.gov, which was, I mean, I think it's fair to say that healthcare.gov was pretty politicized on both sides, you know, and it took a political actor like a president to sort of make that happen and then recognize the value there. As somebody that's served in government for 15 years now, which is odd to say out loud, I have to say that I've been through a few transitions, and political things don't survive, right? And sometimes that's good. Sometimes the political things rise to meet the moment. And so one of the things that USDS has done is it's tried to establish itself as an actual legitimate part of government and not a political group of upstarts. And so we are now hosted by the good people of the Office of Management and Budget, which is a strongly nonpartisan, strongly devoted group of fantastic civil servants that ensure that the government continues running and the budget flows and the policies are normalized throughout the government. I, along with my colleague, Matt Cutts, we had political appointments, or we were in political positions. We converted those to non-political. So we did the hard work of depoliticizing the organization and establishing it for not just one generation, but hopefully for quite some time. And I think also you gotta live what you say, which is if you're gonna be nonpartisan, then you've gotta work for both parties. You've gotta work across all problems, and you've gotta look and you've gotta select projects based on their value rather than based on, the political times. And so there are times when the Obama administration asked us to do things and we were like, I don't think that we should do that, and I think that there are times when we've seen really politicized things happen in both administrations, and we've chosen either not to engage or to engage on the part that we felt was the right thing to do for nonpartisan reasons. And then of course, emergencies are emergencies. Like political lines fade away when people start getting hurt. And so something like the unemployment crisis, something like COVID, really lends itself to the work that we do, which is we're just stepping up for everyday Americans. And so I guess in the end, the hard work has to happen to do that, which is it's a lot of paperwork, but also it helps to keep your focus on real people, right? Because veterans as a group are not a political group. Like patients are not a political group. Doctors are not a political group. They're just people like you and me. And those are the people's problems that we're trying to solve. And as long as we keep our focus on solving those problems, I'm pretty confident that we can work with any administration.
All right, cool. And I think we only have time for one last question if we can fit it. And what's your favorite part about working at the USDS?
My favorite part is by hands down the people. It's been a long time since I've been in college. So I have learned over the last 20 years that where you work and what you work on are important. They really are. But the people that you work with really make or break your experience. I've had my dream job and I didn't love it, right? This job is filled with the most incredible individuals. If you imagine the highest technical quality you can imagine, like the best engineers, the most curious designers, you bring those people together, but you don't bring them together permanently, and you don't bring them together from one place. We're not recruiting from Stanford. We're bringing them from every walk of technical life. We're bringing in, senior government technologists who know how the government works and how services are delivered. We're bringing in, brand name, FANG companies, people at the top of their game, staff engineers, that kind of stuff, distinguished engineers. We're bringing in startup founders and CTOs, people that have really been sort of scrapping it out in the innovation space. And we're bringing all those people together in a situation that just, I don't know what to say, when it's so mission driven, when it's so values based, when there's no profit margin, it's just people trying to help people. So think about the smartest people and the nicest people working together on the thing you all care the most about. It creates an environment that is just the best work environment I've ever been in my life.
All right. I think we have one question that really wants to be answered, and I guess it's gonna be a quick one. I know the last one's gonna be the last one, but is the USDS involved in any way with the election, or have they avoided that?
It's not a question of avoided it. The federal government actually has very little to do with elections. It's very heavily a state resource. And so the USDS, we are only allowed to work with federal agencies or on federally administered programs, so or sort of federal programs that might be administered by the states. Excuse me, something like unemployment insurance, but no, we didn't. But there is a group in DHS called CISA, Cybersecurity Infrastructure, and so they do have a component of protecting the elections, but quite frankly, they're quite good, and they did an excellent job. And so we were aware of CISA. We had sort of spoken to CISA, and they felt very comfortable with what they were going to do, and they executed and they did it. And so really USDS is designed to work on things that aren't working. Enhancing things that already are working isn't really our deal. So instead we went and worked on all manner of other problems, things like making sure that the Americans with Disabilities Act website is actually accessible to people with disabilities.
Cool. I think that's a good way to wrap it up. I want to be cognizant of your time, but I think on behalf of ACM and ACM Innovate, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to answer all these questions and just going through just a lot of the stuff and yeah, just answering a lot of our questions. I don't know if Ronak and Adam, do you have anything else to add?
I'm just really, really great. Had a lot of these same questions. It was really cool to hear everything.
Yeah. And again, I believe this is being recorded, so this will be uploaded up to the YouTube channel. So, you know, if you ever want to watch this, share it with your friends, please do. ACM's YouTube. I don't know what the URL is. acmurl.com/YouTube.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much, Eddie. Really appreciate you taking the time to share some of your insight.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I really encourage all of you to take a try at federal government or even the state government and local government. If it's okay, I'll make a plug. There's a great group out there called Coding It Forward that works with students that are in university that are looking to like have an opportunity to maybe participate for a short period of time in government and civic tech. They're a great group. You know, check them out and maybe spend a couple of months working in the federal government. You'll run into some of us, and maybe we'll convince you to stay for a couple of years.
For some quick context, I did the program, so that's kind of how I learned about this, and it's a really great experience. I recommend it.
Perfect, love it. Like it's exactly the right outcome, and so yeah, check it out. I really look forward to it. But thanks everybody. It was really great. It was really great. I enjoyed it. Great questions.
Have a nice day, everybody. Bye-bye.